就在2008年，澳洲进行重要的国家道歉之后，政府跟原住民族是开启了实质的对话，在相关的原住民族权益、法律还有政策上是做出了大动作的调整跟保障。但是10年过去了，我们也发现澳洲的原住民族在传统领域上依旧还是面对着诸多的开发争议，而在政治以及社会上相对来说还是处于弱势，来到生活里也遭受到了不同的歧视，这在的显示当地的原住民族权益发展还有很多的进步空间。今天的节目，我们派出了特派记者访问澳洲原权律师，同时也访问了曾经担任过澳洲司法部部长的官员，一起针对澳洲原住民族的现况来做讨论，在现在以及未来都提出了见解。而在这之前，时间要先拉回到澳洲政府向原住民族道歉的那个时刻。
澳洲原住民族的历史长达6万年之久。自从英国和欧洲移民进入之后，历经殖民到独立建国，当地原住民族的文化或自主权一直被执政当局所忽视。澳洲政府更是曾经在1910到1970年之间实施同化政策，强迫原住民孩童和父母分离，称为失窃的一代。1990年代，澳洲政府终于针对失窃的一代展开调查，希望弥补文化断裂和对亲情、孩童身心发展造成的伤害，并敦促澳洲政府向原住民族道歉。2008年，当时的澳洲总理 Gamilaroi 终于代表澳洲政府为长久以来的不义政策向原住民族进行国家道歉。
We apologize for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering, and loss on these our fellow Australians. We apologise especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities, and their country. For the pain, suffering, and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants, and for their families left behind, we say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry.
2008年道歉过后，至今届满10年。面对澳洲原住民族的传统领域与开发争议，原住民族妇女权益或社会上的歧视等等议题，澳洲国内掀起一股检视人权发展的声浪。像是澳洲原住民人权律师 Larissa Behrendt， 除了致力推动原住民族法律和政策的发展之外，也拍摄纪录片《道歉过后》作为现况报告。
At the moment in Australia, the main push is to look at recognition of Aboriginal people in the Constitution, but there's also been a very strong call from Aboriginal people across Australia for a treaty with the federal government. We're also campaigning for a stronger voice in Parliament so that the government works more closely with Indigenous people about our laws and policy.
9月7号 ，Larissa 律师跟曾经担任澳洲司法部长的丈夫 Michael Lavarch 在访台行程中接受原民台本节目专访，针对澳洲原住民族土地权益的现况和未来走向进行对话，盼望澳洲政府及社会在国家道歉之后，原住民族集体权益能有更多实质作为和改善。记者苏维轩、花嘉欣整理报道。
It's our great honor to have two distinguished guests from Australia with us today, and they are going to share with us their expertise and also their experiences as lawyers in Australia, and also as the person who have been really devoting yourself in the rights of Indigenous peoples, especially in the legal system in Australia. So first, I would like to introduce Professor Larissa Behrendt. Can you say hello to our audience?
Hello.
And we have also Professor Michael Lavarch.
Lavarch, that's right. And thank you. Thanks very much for having us along.
So welcome to Taiwan, even though it's your last day in Taiwan. I've heard that you have a very good journey this time in Taiwan.
We've loved it. We've absolutely loved it.
Yeah, so because from you and also from your trip that you've been sharing a lot about your experiences in Australia, especially regarding the people's rights in Australia. And also I know from Michael, you are the one who pushed for the adoption of the Native Title Act back in 25 years ago?
Yes, 25 years ago, 1993. It followed a high court decision, so our highest court in Australia, which said that the prevailing legal view that there was no continuing rights of our Indigenous peoples to title on the land was wrong, was a misunderstanding. And as a result of that decision, after a very long and difficult debate through our parliament, the Native Title Act was passed. So what that act does is essentially set up a system where the many traditional owner groups in Australia were able to make a claim for their traditional lands and have their title to those lands recognised. So in the last 25 years, that's now meant around about 40% of the Australian continent now has recognised Aboriginal title to that land. That includes public land, and I know a little bit controversially in Taiwan, also areas of private land where there's a shared right between the traditional owners and the private interest holders. So it was a very significant reform. There still are about 200 claims yet to work their way through our system, so that will grow from 40%, maybe even up to 60 or 70% of Australia will have recognised native title rights.
And what do you see as the most significant meaning of that, as if this land is a native title land, and what difference will it make?
Well, essentially, it's had a couple of very significant differences. The first is the right of traditional owners to have access to the land to perform traditional activities, ceremony, cultural activities, as well as economic pursuits, hunting, fishing, and the like. The second thing, it's meant that if there's a future development proposed, like a new mine being proposed or some important piece of public works, building a road, something like that, the native title holders have the right to be consulted about that, to have their agreement reached about how that development might proceed, and if their rights are affected, to be compensated to the extent of that impact, and if it's a thing like a mine, to get some economic benefit out of that development, jobs as well as an income flow from the profits of the mine. So it's had very significant cultural importance, and it's had very significant economic importance to Australia's Indigenous peoples.
So it's actually similar to the free, prior, informed consent process. And also in Taiwan, actually, we have the Indigenous Peoples Basic Law.
Yes.
In the Article 21 of the Indigenous Peoples Basic Law, we actually have the similar concept that if any kind of research or development project that is going to conduct it within indigenous areas, then we have to seek for the agreement from the indigenous peoples. But that brings me to my next question, because a lot of times, like in Taiwan, we have very profound legal system in terms of indigenous people's rights. But if there's a conflict between different legislations, like if there's something about mining, and with our Mining Act, it's actually, nowadays, it's a big discussion. It's conflicting against our Indigenous People's Basic Act. Do you also have this kind of situation, and also how do you solve this within your country?
Well, with the Native Title Act, because it's a law of our national parliament, that means it prevails over the laws dealing with mining, which are generally state laws. So Australia has a system which has a hierarchy of laws, and the national laws will always win out over the local or state laws. So the native title rights have to be respected irrespective of what the laws around mining might say. Now, there can still be circumstances where traditional owners want to, and indeed still have responsibility for their traditional lands, but their native title over that lands has been lost. And that could have been lost because of the pattern of development. So a big city like Sydney, for instance, very urbanised, it's not possible for native title to exist in an urban centre like that. But the bulk of the Australian continent is open. It's a huge country, and you might have sheep and cattle running over lands. In areas like that, you can have both the native title rights, the rights of the cattle farmer, and then the rights of the mining company, say if there was minerals on that same piece of land. And what the Native Title Act does, it provides a mechanism for a tribunal to sort out those conflicts and to reach an agreement. And if it can't be agreed, then an order of the court, the tribunal, to say how it should be finalised. But the native title rights at least have got sort of the equal status compared to the rights of the cattle farmer and then the mining company. So they don't have to be second-class rights. They're equal rights that have to be sorted through. And sometimes that's complicated, and sometimes that can take some time, but it's important that the native title rights be recognised and respected.
We have other instances outside of native title, though, where protections that are given that would protect Indigenous people, such as racial discrimination legislation, has been repealed so that Indigenous rights then become vulnerable. That has happened in several occasions and meant that Indigenous rights are lesser protected under the system. And that's why one of the things in Australia that Aboriginal people are trying to have happen is some recognition in the Constitution so that there's a higher protection of their rights.
But regarding that, because I know there's a campaign that was launched, I think at least for 10 years, to support the Constitution to include Indigenous people's rights. But I know there's also another campaign that is against that. And I know from the against party, their standpoint is that because if my rights is included in your constitution, that means I'm in a way that I'm recognizing that you have sovereignty over me. So what do you see about this? Because I think that's also a big debate, right?
Yeah, I think there are many ways where some Indigenous people want to push back from being seen as complicit in the Australian state, and not voting is another way that that's often done. But actually, the larger issue many Aboriginal people had about the constitutional recognition campaign as it was running wasn't necessarily about the sovereignty issue, but many people proposing the change, the recognition, just wanted a symbolic recognition, just to say Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are here. So just a recognition. Whereas a lot of Aboriginal people said, well, what's the point of more symbolism? We've had an apology. That's an important symbolic act and nothing's changed. Why do we need more symbolism? We want more substantive change. If you're going to change the Constitution, actively protect our rights like they do in Canada, protect us from racial discrimination, do something that will make a difference. And so as a further challenge to the idea of just symbolism, Aboriginal people have proposed a treaty which goes directly to saying recognise us as sovereign people.
Okay, because that also brings me to my next question, is about that. I think in Taiwan we have the rights that is guaranteed or protected in a lot of different legislations, but in a way sometimes maybe it will become another kind of restriction to us for when we are fulfilling our rights. For example, that you are also very focusing on the rights of child, right? And in Taiwan, we are trying to do that we try to bring back our traditional way of taking care of our own children, and also together with our elders. So we are trying to do like kindergarten, but within the community with cultural practice, like we raise them with our own language and within our own cultural practice. But with that, we also have the restriction from the law, because then the law is requesting that the people who are taking care of the children, you need to have certain kind of license, and also with the house, you have to pass this and that, which is, there's a lot of regulations.
Yes.
And also, so that also prevent us from having our children being taken care of in our own way. So what do you see if all this kind of legislation will sometimes become restriction to us?
Yeah, I understand the point that you're making, and that's also an issue in Australia. There can be examples where people wish to pursue sort of responsive, localised solutions, best outcomes, really through an act of self-determination, and that conflicts against sort of normalised standards applying to the community as a whole. So the Taiwanese experience also occurs in Australia. The best way, I think that and Larissa will comment as well, really is very much about empowering local communities and breathing fully life into the concept of self-determination, and empowering local traditional owner groups to be able to put up structures which in effect would prevail over national standards. There's always going to be a debate and a balance to be done here. You obviously would not want localised practices to emerge which are against sort of normal human rights standards, for instance. So there always can be those conflicts. But self-determination is a very important concept, and it's relatively underdeveloped in Australia, I would say.
And I guess a part of the challenge too is that often the broader community or the dominant culture doesn't have a deep appreciation of the complexities of Indigenous culture. And in Australia, that's certainly a challenge where there's still a large number of Australians who think Aboriginal culture is a negative thing and children shouldn't have too much exposure to it. So we tend to get judged from by a culture that's not our own. And this is particularly so in the child welfare area, where your question is particularly relevant. We have ways of bringing up children in our community that sees a child spend some time with their parents, but then with their grandparents and their aunt and uncle. So we have this notion of communal parenting. And child welfare authorities look at that and say, here's a neglected child, they're not sleeping in one house. So there are ways in which there's an element where the issues Michael's raised about the law also needs to be addressed with a deeper understanding about the complexities and the strengths of Indigenous culture, because of course communal child rearing is a much better way to bring up children.
Yeah, and that's also the next question I would like to raise is about the public opinion, because as you said, the public understanding, not only within the government system, but the whole society need to understand and also have the sense of, for example, the apology, because after 10 years, after the Prime Minister apologized to Indigenous peoples, if the public opinion are against it, then nothing can really be done. And that's also a challenge in Taiwan now. So President Tsai made the apology 2 years ago. But for me or for some of the indigenous organizations, as our observation, we will say the public understanding is really far from enough. And that's also become an obstacle for us to really push through a lot of good policies, and also the commitment made in the apology. So what do you see from this about the public opinions? How can we really improve that?
But I think there's a lot of complexity almost around the notion of apologies. At first instance, you think that they're a very positive thing. That's a formal recognition on behalf of government for actions that have occurred and a commitment to move forward. And that is a very positive thing to occur. In Australia, the apology occurred after a long period of public debate, community awareness being raised, particularly around the issue of the removal of Aboriginal children from their families as a part of the assimilation project of colonial governments over many decades. So the point was reached where the broader community said, yes, this was a very good thing and should have occurred. So to that extent, that may be a bit different from Taiwan, where that level of community awareness wasn't there prior to the apology. But on the other side, there's a bit of a negative to it. There's, at least in Australia, there was an assumption that once the apology was made, well, that's the end of that. You know, we're terribly sorry about what's happened in the past. You know, let's just get on with life. But in Australia, there's still so much more to do, particularly around child removal. But probably the broader population now thinks, well, that's all done now. We've had the apology. What are you people still on about? Why are you still talking about this? That's behind us. So it's, as I say, it's a little bit complex, isn't it?
That's right. And it is true that at least for Australia, the apology became an important national moment, and it's a very big difference with here, because lots of non-Indigenous Australians came to hear the apology. It was very public. It's now taught in the schools. There's even an anniversary of the apology that's a moment to look back on it. So it's changed the national focus, and that's certainly not the case here. So it is a reminder that you need to have a strong public discussion about why this is important, and why apologising to the Indigenous community is not just important for them, but is actually important for the whole country. And I guess Australians would say the apology was something that the whole country needed. So it shows that an apology, to have that symbolic meaning, needs to have a lot of work put into it for people to understand the moment and for the moment to be significant. But as Michael said, one of the things that we've seen is that people now think that this is no longer an issue, but we have issues of intergenerational trauma that have occurred because of the past policy, so it's still something people are living with. The numbers of Aboriginal children in out-of-home care has doubled since the apology, and it's increasing, so it is becoming a huge issue for our community again that most Australians don't even know about. And very sadly, I have heard some of our old people say, I wish there hadn't been an apology, because now people think everything's okay and it's not. So there is that sense of having to follow up the symbolism with something concrete that will actually make a difference in people's lives.
And is that also why you think like media or filmmaking is very important in this process?
Yes, I do. I think we see it both as a way to engage the broader community in these issues. Michael and I are both lawyers, so we're very good at making legal arguments or evidence-based policy arguments about why laws are bad or how their implementation is not correct, or their interpretation is not correct. And I guess one thing we've learnt through filmmaking is that you can then show through a human story, somebody's personal story, why a law is unjust. And when you see what happens to a person and you humanise the impact, you're able to get a better response from people who'll turn around and say, well, that's not fair, that shouldn't happen, we should change this. So although we think we're very good lawyers, we do understand the power of the storytelling to complement legal reform that can be argued in that way. And I think one thing we really like in our films is it is an opportunity to take the voice of somebody who never gets heard, people in our community who maybe aren't educated, who don't have access to speaking on television, who don't know members of parliament, and to give them a chance to tell their story in their own words, which is not only important for other people to hear that person's story, but we've really noticed it empowers the person who gets to finally speak. And it's not to say it solves their issues, but we have seen how the ability to tell their story and tell their pain and talk about their experience can be a part of their healing. For us, for me as an Indigenous filmmaker, as filmmakers working in Indigenous areas, the power of Indigenous voice is something that we feel is very, very important. And that's why we're interested in filmmaking, and it's why we support Indigenous media. I work in the media back in Australia as well. I have an Indigenous-focused radio program on the national broadcaster to reach non-Indigenous people. And people need to hear more broadly our stories and to hear the voices they don't otherwise hear, and to hear the Indigenous perspective. And one thing I love doing on my show is I'll give the Indigenous perspective on the Indigenous issues of the day, but we also give the Indigenous perspective on the mainstream issues. My Indigenous guests talk about tax reform, they talk about the Trump presidency, just to show that actually we know more than just our own community. We are very thoughtful on every issue.
That's very important, and also that kind of remind me of why I wanted to join the Indigenous media in the first place. So thank you very much for your sharing and very inspiring insight from your own experiences, and hope to see you again next time to Taiwan. Maybe next time you can stay longer, and also you can visit different communities, and maybe at that time we can also share more about what happened after the apology in Taiwan with you.
We would love that. We've fallen in love with Taiwan and we'll definitely be back.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.